You weren't meant to control the storm. You were meant to survive what it came to reveal. But no one told you that. They told you to manage it, predict it, plan for it, to keep smiling while everything inside you drowned in noise. So you did. You managed. You built walls out of routines. You called it discipline. You called it being strong. But strength isn't control. It's surviving the moment when control fails and still not vanishing from yourself. There's a kind of exhaustion you can't sleep off. It's the fatigue of always holding the roof in place while the rain pounds on a house that was never truly safe. You don't fear the storm. You fear what it will show you. The memories that might surface. The truths that might scream louder than the wind. You feel it at night, that tremor in your chest, like something's knocking, not from outside, but from beneath the calm you rehearsed. Beneath the mask you wear even when no one's watching. You don't want peace, not really. You want anesthesia. Peace requires presence, and presence means facing what you've locked away. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's what Jung said, and you feel it, even if you don't say it. The storm isn't chaos. It's your shadow knocking on the door of your survival script. Every time you try to control it, you're not saving yourself. You're avoiding the moment of collapse that might actually set you free. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Frankl wrote that from the edge of despair, not as hope, but as reality. So maybe you weren't meant to fix the weather. Maybe you were meant to feel it and see what survives inside you when the rain comes. You built a roof over your soul, and now you wonder why the storm never cleans you. But the truth is brutal. You can't wash in water you refuse to touch. So, ask yourself, what if this storm isn't here to destroy you? What if it's here to drown the version of you that was never really free? Not to punish, but to uncover. Not to end you, but to begin you. Again, in truth. Let this question stay. Let it echo in the silence. What am I really trying to control? And what part of me would finally breathe if I let it go? You became your own meteorologist, always alert, always bracing, scanning the sky of your emotions like it's a battlefield, waiting for the next explosion of thunder beneath your ribs. You track shifts in mood the way others track storms on radar, not to understand, but to prevent. You've trained yourself to feel the smallest tremor, a sigh that's too heavy, a message that takes too long to arrive, a silence that sounds too much like the last time someone left. This isn't intuition. This is fear in disguise. This is a body that never learned how to trust the calm, because calm for you was never calm. It was the silence before the scream. You call it being prepared. But preparation turned into paranoia, and vigilance turned into self-erasure. You think if you forecast the storm early enough, you can stop the flood. But all you've done is stop yourself from ever relaxing. You never really sleep. You only collapse into temporary shutdowns, because your nervous system never learned that rest isn't a trap. You've turned your nervous system into a storm tracker and called it maturity. But maturity isn't knowing the weather. It's knowing you'll survive it. This obsession with control, with predicting how someone might react, how you'll feel tomorrow, how to avoid saying the wrong thing, feeling the wrong thing. It's not wisdom. It's trauma that never got a name. You were taught that survival meant anticipation, that if you could just stay one step ahead, you'd never be hurt again. But that strategy became your prison. Now even peace feels suspicious, even love feels dangerous. Because part of you still believes that if you stop watching the skies, everything will collapse. But what if that collapse is the beginning, not of pain, but of a different kind of peace? The kind that doesn't need a forecast, the kind that doesn't fear the rain. You say you want stability, but what you really crave is immunity. Immunity from pain, from surprise, from loss. You don't seek control because you're strong. You seek it because you're terrified. It looks organized from the outside, a calendar, a strategy, a 5-year plan, but underneath it's chaos, not the kind that screams, the kind that whispers, "If I stop managing everything, I'll fall apart." And maybe you will. But maybe that's not the enemy. Maybe that's the beginning of something more honest than this curated survival. The more you micromanage timelines, conversations, outcomes, the clearer the truth becomes. You're not leading your life. You're trying to cage it. There's a version of you that exists only in control. It doesn't breathe. It calculates. It doesn't feel. It performs. And the cost of that performance, you never get to be fully alive. Just composed. Just efficient. Just safe. And numb. Jung wrote that the ego clings to the illusion of dominance. It believes it's in command when really it's just afraid of the unconscious forces beneath the surface. Afraid of the wild things, the forgotten things, the wounded things. You thought controlling everything would bring freedom, but the truth is quieter and crueler. What you call order may just be fear with good posture. You weren't born to master every moment. You were born to move through them, unstable, imperfect, real. And maybe the first act of liberation isn't doing more. It's watching your hands unclench, watching the grip loosen, watching the fear that looks like responsibility begin to dissolve, not into failure, but into breath, into space, into life again. You think you're afraid of losing control, but what you're truly afraid of is remembering what the control was hiding. It was never about the to-do lists, the routines, the rituals of certainty. It was about silence, the kind that echoes with things you swore you'd never let rise again. Because when control slips, the voices return. The voice of the child who wasn't protected. The scream that got swallowed in the name of being polite. The grief you masked with schedules. The panic you dressed up as perfection. You don't fear the storm. You fear what it might unlock. And deep down, you know, there are parts of you still trapped in forgotten seasons, still curled in the corners of memories you edited out of your own story. But the storm doesn't invent anything. It reveals. It brings back the fragments, the ache in your chest when you hear a familiar tone, the freeze in your body when someone raises their voice, the apology you keep rehearsing in your head to someone who never really listened. This isn't regression. This is confrontation. The moment when what you buried starts to speak. The rain doesn't bring madness. It brings the things you've silenced for too long. It's not chaos. It's the archive of your emotional history finally opening its doors. And maybe remembering hurts. But forgetfulness? That's what really breaks you. Slowly, quietly, permanently. You tried to move on by erasing. But real healing doesn't come from deletion. It comes from integration, from hearing the voice you silenced and realizing it never stopped speaking. You just stopped listening. So when the storm begins, don't panic. Listen, not to the noise outside, but to the echo within. You've been taught that to surrender is to fail, that giving in means giving up. But that's a misunderstanding born from a life spent fighting everything that hurt. You surrendered once, as a child, and it didn't end well. So now you resist everything, even yourself. But resistance isn't always strength. Sometimes it's a barrier that keeps you stuck in the war long after the battle is over. You confuse numbness with resilience, silence with discipline, avoidance with clarity. But surrender is different. It's not apathy, it's truth. Truth without resistance. It's the moment you stop trying to fix what was never yours to carry. The moment you realize that drowning isn't the same as disappearing. Because maybe you were never supposed to float through this life untouched. Maybe your soul doesn't want to be saved. It wants to be seen. And when you stop resisting what the storm is asking you to feel, it stops being your enemy. It becomes your mirror. The chaos outside reflects the chaos within. And in that reflection, something aligns, not perfectly, not painlessly, but honestly. Presence begins where resistance ends. You keep saying you're tired, but maybe you're not tired from the storm. You're tired from pretending it's not there. Let it rain. Let it soak the walls you've spent years defending. You're not drowning. You're dissolving the version of you that was never allowed to float. And in that undoing, you just might find the quiet you've been chasing, not by escaping the storm, but by becoming someone who no longer fears what it brings. You say you want peace, but when it comes, you flinch. Not because peace is wrong, but because peace is unfamiliar. And for a nervous system raised in chaos, unfamiliar means unsafe. You learn to read love through tension, through walking on eggshells, through waiting for silence to snap. So when love comes soft, when it doesn't spike your heart rate or leave you guessing or make you ache for validation, you call it dull. You say something's missing, but what's missing is the violence your body mistook for connection. You don't miss them. You miss the turbulence that matched your inner world, because part of you only feels alive in chaos, only feels worthy when you're fixing something broken. Stillness triggers grief. Kindness feels suspicious. And calm. Calm tastes like the calm before a scream. Attachment trauma doesn't fade with time. It hides, it whispers, it builds a life where crisis feels like home and peace feels like a lie you can't afford to believe in. So you sabotage the silence. You pick the fight. You ghost the one who's steady, because something inside you still thinks safety is what happens right before everything goes wrong again. But what if it's not a lie? What if calm isn't absence, but presence? Not the absence of danger, but the presence of something your body doesn't yet know how to trust. It's not that you don't want peace, it's that peace feels like dying to the part of you that only knew how to survive through storms. And maybe now you're not dying, you're rewiring. Slowly, quietly, learning how to stay when it's safe, learning how to breathe when there's nothing to brace for, learning that peace might just be what love sounds like when it no longer needs to hurt to feel real. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You tell yourself you're rebuilding, but you're just reinforcing the same walls. Walls made of control, of silence, of perfectly arranged habits that keep anything real from getting in. You call it healing. But healing isn't what happens when you decorate your wounds. It's what happens when you let the roof collapse and feel the sky again, even if it terrifies you. You're trying to fix yourself from inside the same house that once made you hide everything. And every time you reinforce those old beams, perfectionism, hyper-independence, emotional detachment, you're not healing. You're just building a prettier prison. There's a version of you that never got to feel the rain, the raw, dissolving kind. The kind that cleans what shame made you hide. But to feel that, you'd have to stop patching every leak. You'd have to let the fear drip through the ceiling and admit you're tired of pretending this structure is still holding. You fear the flood, but maybe you were never meant to be dry. Jung said the shadow comes alive in rupture, not retreat, not in the moments you feel strong, but in the ones that strip you bare. Because only then can you see which parts were real and which were just coping strategies dressed up as personality. Maybe you don't need another renovation. Maybe you need demolition, not to destroy who you are, but to finally uncover the self that was buried beneath all your survival plans. You can't heal in a house where the walls still whisper that your feelings are too loud, where the windows are sealed against change, where every door leads to a mirror that tells you, be better, be calmer, be quiet. Let it collapse. Let the storm do what you've been avoiding. And in the ruin, maybe you'll find space, real space, to rebuild something not out of fear, but out of truth. In every ancient story, the storm marks a beginning, not of peace, but of transformation. It arrives not to ruin the character, but to strip away everything false. You weren't meant to master the storm. You were meant to walk into it uncertain, trembling, raw, and leave it with only what cannot be taken. That's what the storm does. Not with kindness, but with clarity. It doesn't offer guidance. It removes illusions. The identity built on approval, gone. The pride built on control, cracked. The false calm you mistook for healing drowned. You don't become someone new in the storm, you become someone honest. Someone unfinished but unafraid to start again without the armor. We keep calling these moments breakdowns, but they are initiations. Old skin shedding, old beliefs collapsing, old loyalties to pain dissolving in the thunder. It's not poetic. It's brutal, but initiation always is. In mythology, no one returns the same. And the storm, it doesn't care what you planned. It only cares what's real enough to remain standing after everything else is gone. Psycho-spiritually, this is ego death. The moment when the self you curated can no longer hold against the truth that's been begging to rise. You don't master the storm. You become someone who no longer fears what it touches. This is not about wisdom. It's about surrendering to the right, not to suffer, but to remember, because the storm isn't your punishment. It's your passage. It's the threshold between who you were told to be and who you were born to become. The storm didn't break you. It revealed the cracks that were always there. Hairline fractures in your voice, in your memories, in the way you say, "I'm fine," with a trembling exhale. You weren't shattered. You were saturated, soaked in years of holding back what you had no space to feel. And now, the pieces are visible, not because you failed, but because the disguise could no longer hold. You spent so long hiding the fragile architecture, the thoughts that didn't fit the image, the needs that felt like burdens, the softness that made you feel weak in a world obsessed with strength. But the storm didn't come to shame you. It came to cleanse what shame made you bury. Now everything you tried to manage is on the floor, unfolded, exposed, real, and maybe that's not a disaster. Maybe it's the first honest moment you've had in years, the version of you that controlled every detail, that apologized for taking up space, that built silence into a survival skill, was never the whole story. Now, the storm has scattered that story, and in the aftermath, you are free to rebuild, not from panic, not from pretending, but from truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need validation, the kind of truth that breathes even when no one is watching. Your most honest self isn't the one that avoided the collapse. It's the one that stood there, soaked and stripped, and whispered, "I'm still here." The storm never wanted to hurt you. It just refused to let you lie to yourself anymore. You spent so long trying to avoid the rain, you forgot what it feels like to be touched by something real. So long fearing collapse, you never noticed the quiet strength rising in the ruins. This isn't about endurance anymore. This is about becoming. Jung called it individuation. The moment you stop trying to become someone acceptable and start becoming someone true. But truth doesn't come through perfection, it comes through confrontation. With your fear, with your silence, with every belief that told you you had to be someone else to be worthy of peace. Frankl wrote, "It's not the situation that changes us, it's how deeply we allow it to confront who we really are." And the storm? It confronted you. It unmade you. And now, in the stillness after the flood, you realize what survived wasn't the strongest part. It was the most honest. You were never supposed to fix the weather. You were supposed to become someone who could walk barefoot in the downpour and still hear their own heartbeat. Let the wind undo you. Let the rain baptize you. Let the thunder say the things you never did. Because this isn't the end of your story. It's the point where the pages go blank and you stop repeating what hurt you. You are not lost in the storm. You are becoming through it. And yes, there is still time to stop controlling and start remembering who you were before the sky split open.